1. So for some context, I've played around with D&D, Pathfinder, Whitehack for a bit. I know my way around the role-playing field, and although I tend to lean into any kind of magical and spellcaster-based classes, I'm totally up to learn new classes and new characters. I'm in my 3rd year of college and spent these 3 years in my college's D&D club. In this club, we run not only 5e, but other OS as well. I myself am running a Star Trek Adventures 2D20 campaign during the time of this event, and to this day. At the time, I was looking around for a campaign to join on the off days when I wasn't narrating the stellar adventures of the USS Odyssey A, when I found a group of our club's Discord looking for another player to join a Starfinder campaign. Now at the time, I was pretty tight schedule-wise. I'm a college writing tutor at our school's writing center, and I'm a lifeguard on weekends. On top of trying to earn an education major and psychology minor. In other words, I'm not usually active on servers unless it's scheduling, the occasional hello, if I have a nice weekend or day off, or it's an emergency, such as I'm sick and can't make it. Essentially, the characters were supposed to be involved with building a whole interstellar empire from the ground up. I myself, upon seeing most of the group picking classes that would make them a combat or a spellcaster route, decided to try and be the group diplomat, and built a charisma-based character who, while great with an energy pistol, preferred talking and negotiating peace and beneficial relationships. We had our session 0, and we successfully made our characters. I was excited and pumped to help build the empire from nothing, although I was also terrified for my character's sake. He was probably going to handle all the late-night administrative work. Here's where the trouble happens. Around Friday night of our Session 1 week, 2 days before the session starts, the DM messages me on Discord. I thought about it and I decided to remove you from the group. I don't think that your interests align with the science fiction theme of the campaign, and I don't think your character will work. Now here's the thing, I'm always happy to change, edit, even recreate or make a whole new character if there are any issues in the campaign. I even help out the people in my Star Trek campaign who might struggle with their character, and I have never faulted them if they want to change or want to make a new one. But never in my entire life with any tabletop RPG have I witnessed a DM kick out a player mere days before the campaign even starts. I immediately knew he was lying to me and called him out, telling him that his reasoning was rather bogus. Seriously, you're telling the Star Trek nerd that his interests don't align with your space sci-fi campaign? And that I wanted the real reason. He never responded to any of my Discord messages. I eventually, after getting no response, talked to other people. One of my Star Trek Alliance players apparently was the person who dropped out of his campaign and left the spot that I was supposed to take open. According to her, he sent her several messages on Discord, constantly atting her, and even trying to VC her several times during her class. This wasn't for scheduling reasons or reasons about the campaign, but because he was mad that she wasn't as active as others in his campaign server, and didn't respond to the memes he put in the memes channel. After that, she told him to knock it off and said that she would leave the campaign if he didn't stop bombing her phone during class and work. He then replied with, "I don't know why you treat that stuff so seriously. D&D is way more important," which made her get mad and leave. After hearing her story, I thought back to my lack of participation in their Gen Chat and meme section, which was blowing up my phone with pings and caused me to mute those channels. I can only assume that ticked the DM off, which is a pretty stupid reason in my opinion. I'm pretty glad that he decided to kick me, whatever reasoning that is. I don't think it's normal or okay for someone to dictate how often you should be online, especially if you have other stuff that is more important than a campaign, such as school or work. I'm still running my Star Trek campaign and having a blast with my players. 2. So I played D&D in an RPG club at my local game store near the college. Our group would get together on Wednesday after our classes were done and play our campaign. This campaign included me, the DM, a pacifist, a normal guy, a normal girl, a freshman girl who was just getting into D&D, and her boyfriend, 30-something-year-old grognard. Most of us went to the said college except Grognard and DM. Now, Grognard was a hyper-min-maxed human fighter and was kind of smug about everyone else's character except his girlfriend's. Sexy and badass tiefling druid. Blech. And would jab us, playfully, about how weak our characters were. This wasn't as big a problem as you'd think, as we'd roast his character too. But he would constantly give tips to the DM about how he can improve the campaign by, for example, giving us more freedom to explore the dungeons and overworld. Grognard was big on exploration and dungeon crawling, and DM was, in all fairness, kind of railroady. This led to quite a few passive-aggressive arguments between the DM and Grognard. DM took an insane amount of pride in his world and took it super seriously. To him, Grognard's tips were not appreciated, and Grognard didn't seem to get that. Things came to a head after a major argument about how Grognard felt we were being forced to go to the Nine Hells by a transporter demon that abducted us when he, and the group, wanted to explore the Shadowfell for a magic sword. DM insisted that in his world the Shadowfell and Nine Hells were intimately connected. Grognard didn't buy that this wasn't pulled out of the DM's behind, because we didn't roll any saves for it. After the argument escalated and escalated, DM started cussing out Grognard and then immediately killed his character off by having the demon eat him. No death saves, no nothing. Grognard stormed out. Next session, Grognard came back. He told the party that while he is still annoyed at the DM, his girlfriend wants him to play, and kind of highlighted some of the ways that he was being a dick himself. Grognard rolled up an elf druid. He was still min-maxed as hell, but he did do better about making his character feel more alive in terms of roleplay and backstory. He laid off giving DM tips for the next few months, until DM introduced his DMPC, a demon blood hunter from the Shadowfell, who hunted other demons and devils. This DMPC was bad. I'm not gonna mince words. He was the quintessential combination of Mary Sue main character syndrome and the DM's barely disguised fetish. Oh my. So now our characters were basically side characters in his simulated novel. And this DMPC was sometimes hostile to the party. This came to a head when the pacifist of our group, Hobbit Barbarian, questioned his increasingly cruel methods in regards to a demon prisoner who claimed to be a defector. DMPC then angrily accused Hobbit of being in league with the forces of hell, but Hobbit wouldn't budge and demanded that the DMPC stop torturing the demon, or he would release him. DMPC then attacked Hobbit. The party intervened to save him. He made up all kinds of BS excuses as to why he couldn't land a hit on him. My Kenku Warlock literally fell through the ground. No checks, no saves. DMPC ultimately killed Hobbit Barbarian. Grognard rolled his eyes and muttered something, and then DM got insanely annoyed and said, "What?" and stood up. "You got your more advice on how I run my campaign?" Grognard just said, "All I said was this DMPC is something else." "You got something to say about this DMPC that I put hours of work for your sake into, do you?" Grognard then said, "Oh, come on, if you're gonna do this, don't go off like he exists for our sake. Your DMPC is there for you and we all know it." DM just said, "You know what? Screw you. Rocks fall, smash your elf's brains out, and as your soul leaves your body, a demon eats it." As DM is screaming at him. Grognard then got up and said, "You know what? If you want to railroad us through your power fantasy, why not just write a crappy novel?" DM then punched Grognard in the eye. He fell back, and Grognard then punched back, and before we could blink they had, rolled initiative in the middle of the gaming store. Grognard's girlfriend tried to intervene, and DM just kind of pushed her aside, which sent Grognard into a barbarian rage until he beat the DM to a bloody pulp, as the store owner was calling the cops and the rest of us were intervening before Grognard made him roll death saves. Okay, that's the last pun. I'm sorry. The police came and took DM and Grognard down to the station, but ultimately Grognard didn't press charges. He said, "Sometimes men fight." He did get a bit cocky about winning the fight afterwards, but regardless, we ended up taking a break from D&D until a few months later, when I took up the DM mantle. It's still ongoing. In fact, it's a fairly new campaign, but it is so far going well. We never saw the last DM again, though, as while Grognard let him off the hook in terms of charges, he did file a restraining order and was banned from the game store. 3. In all my years of D&D, I never quit a group or a campaign. I had groups fall apart due to scheduling, motivation, etc., but never due to conflict until now. I joined a new campaign about 4 months ago. Myself and the DM were the only experienced players. The rest are a bunch of newbies. Things start off pretty normally. I'm playing a cleric, there's a barbarian, a rogue, and a rogue assassin. My cleric and the assassin don't start off on the right foot, my cleric being, well, a cleric, doesn't approve much of the murder for money thing the assassin does. At the time, I just thought, hey, it's good roleplay and gives our characters the opportunity to overcome this and build a friendship. Little did I know I was starting a vendetta against my cleric. The game continued on. My cleric was shy and a bit traumatized by her past, so she tended to be on the quiet side and let the other party members do their thing. This led to us being thrust into a lot of interesting situations, but we escaped most of them relatively unscathed. Fast forward a few months and things are a bit more tense. There have been a few squabbles between my cleric and the assassin, and now the campaign has reached a point where the party is being hunted by another assassin group due to a choice the assassin made. My cleric is unhappy about this for obvious reasons, and as a player I try to strike a happy balance between voicing displeasure but also working towards a solution. Eventually, the big fight with the other assassins comes up. My cleric votes to run out but gets voted out by the rest of the party, and into the fray we go. 3/4 of the way through the fight my cleric goes down. End up failing my death saves, but the DM pulls out a MacGuffin and brings me back to life. I play my character for the rest of the session as being shell-shocked and trying to process the whole dying and resurrection thing. During this we learn a lot about the BBEG and his origins and motivations, which leads to a large disagreement between the cleric and the assassin about how to handle it. A couple of sessions later, things are now very heated between our characters. We spend most of the session arguing, with the assassin basically telling the cleric, "Suck it up, nobody cares, this is a job." The only reason it didn't turn into a fight is the DM banned PvP unless both people consent. I tried talking to the DM after the session, saying I was struggling with what to do since the assassin character has been pushing all of the cleric's buttons. He essentially said, well, if it makes sense for her to leave for a bit to process everything, have her do that. I told him I'd think about it and let him know. At the same time, I thought I'd reach out to the assassin's player and try to see if we could come to some sort of resolution. That went about as well as our in-game conversations. She told me she thought my character was annoying, and when I tried to bring up any of the reasons my cleric had a problem with her, she basically hand-waved it away with excuses, and that's just how it is. Our next session is in a few days. I'm genuinely debating on whether I show up. I feel bad because aside from this, I've enjoyed the game and the story. And it was right when I was finally getting to see some character development. Anyway, thanks for letting me rant. Health Research note, just want to add here, if it's at the point now where you're not having fun, you're doing this recreationally, it's in your off hours, do you really want to be spending time with someone who clearly just does not like you? Or do you want to go find something more enjoyable to do? Personally, I'd go do the more enjoyable thing if I wasn't having fun with the game anymore. 4. So I was running my first campaign, in my low magic setting that took me a couple of years to make and write a short handbook for. We are using Pathfinder 1E, since I'd grown up playing 2E, then 3.0, then 3.5, then PF1E, and I was most familiar with it. I had 5 players and we kicked everything off with a session 0. Then a great first arc. A friend expressed interest in joining after he heard some of the other players told him about it. We'll call him Wizard. He joined and played what amounts to a PF1E Alchemist with the Wizard spell list. I am essentially familiar with PF1E, so I was making sure it had all fit, and it was working. Wizard immediately started complaining about PF1E rules, like using Dex for ranged touch attacks instead of the spellcasting stat, like 5e does for ranged spell attacks, as well as only 3 saves versus 6. Also lots of grief about 5 to 10 diagonals and spell shapes being spheres instead of effectively cubes, as they are in 5e when not using 5 to 10 diagonals. We wrap up the first arc, then get to a relatively safe place to rest and decide where we want to go next. Wizard starts telling the players each session how much easier and simpler 5e is. He eventually rallies Fighter, who is 100% TTRPG newbie, and Paladin, good friend who I've played a 1 to 20 campaign with as a fellow player. 3 is enough for a player majority, and as I did my best to respect players' collective wishes, I agree that we can switch systems, with the caveat that I'm new to 5e and will have to communicate. We're at level 7, so Wizard shows up to the first 5e session with Artificer 1, Full Plate plus Shield Rogue, Expertise in Arcana, and Chronergy Wizard 5. I'll give some highlights below. Wizard immediately starts playing the Power Gamer Munchkin angle of the rules don't say I can't, at most angles. Anytime I make a ruling that Wizard doesn't like, he starts pulling up Jeremy Crawford tweets at table and reads them aloud. Unless Crawford agrees with my ruling. Wizard buys Strixhaven the day it releases, and starts using silvery barbs before I even know the spell exists. I look it up, say that I'm not on board with it.
It's Wizards of the Coast, therefore my PC can use it.
We get a 1-hour presentation and discussion about how silvery barbs is not broken, is weaker than shield, and should be allowed. Wizard has said he plans to abuse Mirage Arcane when he gets it. Because it doesn't provide a save, he should be able to auto-kill anything by making a deadly illusion, like a lake of lava under an army, or turning a cliff into sand to bury an enemy force. I struggle to see how that's fun for the whole party or in the scope of an illusion spell, and a terribly long party discussion ensues. After the Mirage Arcane discussion, he starts reminding players every time they level, "Don't tell the DM what your new abilities are so you can surprise him." Wizard's spell list is entirely turn removal and shutdown spells. Encounters are either trivialized or Wizard complains, if the enemies have legendary resistance and such. At higher level, his favorite spells are Force Cage, Maze, and Feeble Mind due to lack of saves. I'll admit to not having yet had the swing of 6 to 8 encounters down to make spell slots matter more, but also Wizard started asking for long rests after 2 to 3 encounters. Wizard would correct my called rolls. Roll nature to know about this dragon, I'd say. Then Wizard would say it should be Arcana, which he had expertise in. Wizard would say, "My Arcana modifier is X, you should just hand me the stat block." When I didn't, he'd just pull it up on DDB and then correct me if I altered a save DC or AC or anything. When I started using third-party published monsters, MCDM, 2C Gaming, etc., Wizard audibly complained. Needless to say, this player did not finish the campaign. Still, in all my years as a player, and PF1E DM and now 5e, I've never encountered another player who felt so in a position to push back at table. Now in my games, I rule a certain way, and then invite post-session discussion. I'm also much more clear in Session 0 that attempts to find exploits or basically anything on our Power Gamer Munchkin will likely not get a positive response. 5. This one's more funny than anything, so if you're looking for a story where someone is the bad guy, sorry. I'm the closest one to the bad gal. Also obligatory, memory is spotty. The system was Pathfinder 1E, and our DM was starting up a pirate-themed campaign. Another player tried to run the Skull and Shackles adventure path and got burnt out fast. The exact classes of the other two players are not that relevant, so I'll just call them Fighter and Summoner. But they were very melee-focused combatants, while I rolled up a sorcerer, Bard Kisune. We were playing with Gestalt, if you know what that is, who was focused on enchantment spells, maybe a bit too much. I put as much as I could into Charisma, intended to go down the magical tail feat line for more enchantment nonsense, and generally disregarded direct combat beyond having a light crossbow. I only had a 12 in con for a total of 9 HP. After we make our characters, the scene is set. We're adrift on a crappy ship and a much better merchant vessel is ripe for invasion and takeover. We board, and I roll a really sweet intimidate check to convince most people on board to not fight us, except for the captain and first mate. When combat began, my involvement may as well have ceased. DM wanted to encapsulate the size of the ship, so he decided that every square was 30 feet, instead of the usual 5 feet per square. As the melee combatants got into the fray somewhat slowly, I set up my bard buffs and couldn't do much else. To actually attack the captain or first mate, the melee combatants had to move inside their square, which is fine for everyone except me. Level 1 casters have it pretty rough. Most of the spells I picked had a range of 30 feet level, pretty much melee, and I had an AC of like 12. Well, the captain could reasonably one-hit knockout me if I was in range. Should I have taken mage armor in hindsight, as summoners lightly ribbed me for not doing so? Yeah, that didn't change the fact that trying to get into effectively melee range against a guy with a flail makes me a liability, since I need to keep my performance active. Couple of rounds of doing nothing later, I had it. I don't care if I hit or not, I wanted to do something. I took my crossbow, aimed for the first mate, or captain, and that one crossbow string snapped. I'll admit, afterwards, I kinda checked out of the game, since I couldn't do anything but provide a +1 to the actual players, and my saltiness was kinda leaking into some passive-aggressive quips for me during combat, which I still feel bad over. We're all still friends, cousins actually, and still playing together, and I don't hold any ill will to anyone involved. If any of the three involved hear this, I adore our games and look forward to playing more. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 20-Sided Dunce, Episode 10. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do hit the like button if you'd be so good. Thank you kindly. And if you'd like to get early access to these videos, you can support me on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. You get the week's videos on a Monday for as little as $1 or more if you choose a month. You'll also find links in there to the Hellfreezer merchandise store on Teespring, as well as links to the Hellfreezer Discord. And if you really liked today's video and you'd like to leave a tip, you can do that by clicking on the heart with a $sign underneath the video. But you don't have to do that, although I do appreciate it. Okay, now let's move on to Hellfreezer's question and answer of the day. And today's question is, what is the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear pirate? Just tagging on from the last story there. For me, it's Stede Bonnet and Edward Teach. Not the real ones, of course, the fictional ones in Our Flag Meets Death. The thing about that for me is I often get annoyed with things that are based on a true story, unless it's obviously it's 100% fictional. That I think is fun, and this story is obviously fictional. I mean, if you look at the actual people, they really were only around as pirates for like 1 or 2 years, historically speaking. And it is fun to see actual elements of truth kind of woven in there in an otherwise fictional story. But that's my favourite show right now. Unfortunately, it only got 2 seasons. Although it does have an ending, so it wasn't like a disappointing thing. So worth buying the box set for me, that one. But my thing, and I've probably spoken about this before, is whenever they do something that this is a biopic, this is a true story, you know it's not going to be. They're going to fictionalize things. Even in the Queen biopic, they fictionalize things. So I often find myself just not wanting to engage with them unless it's something that's clearly, definitely fictional, just using versions of real people. I hope that's not too confusing. A good example is the Anno Dracula novels by Kim Newman. Oftentimes real people are featured in there, but they're usually vampires or something like that. Such as various politicians. Anyway, that's my answer. Let me know what yours is in a comment below. And before we go, let's have the answer of the day from a previous video. And this question was in relation to things you've seen in like works of fiction, TV shows, movies, and you thought, oh, I'd like to have that. And today's answer comes from Annie Northman. I have done this many times. One of my favourite movies is Hobo with a Shotgun, and I've bought replica jock jackets from 2 of the characters. Both have the names embroidered on the back, and made from vegan leather. Other times I've painted scenes from an animated show, or I'll make patches of movie and show quotes. I still do this when I find time. Actually, it's got me thinking. One of my favourite belt buckles, and I liked it so much I bought it twice, was the cocky belt buckle. It's like a red buckle with a cockerel on it, from the show Bones, the character Celie Booth wore. And I bought one years ago. It was very expensive. Well, very expensive. For me at the time it was expensive. It was about £15. And years later it broke. I got a few years use out of it, and it couldn't be repaired. And I then found the same belt buckle. At this time it was like £5 for the same thing. I was like, well, okay, they've come down in price. So I bought the replacement. I got a few years use out of that before that one broke. And I'm hoping I can somehow repair this one because I still have it. It was a few months back it broke. And I just need to find the little loop on the back. I think that's the part that broke. So fingers crossed I can find those for sale at maybe just a couple of quid. Because otherwise, if it's going to be like £10 to buy like a whole pack of them, it's really not worth it. I may as well just get a new buckle at that point. As it happens right now, I've got a smiley face emoji belt buckle. I do like my novelty buckles. What can I say? And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.